The scar on my right forearm tells a story that nobody expects. It's a mottled pink now, no longer the angry red it once was. Sometimes visitors notice it when I'm pouring tea or tending to my garden here in Traverse City. They politely avoid, asking, assuming it's just another mark of aging. But this scar isn't a badge of carelessness or fragility. It's a reminder of the day I finally understood my worth. The day my 14-year-old grandson taught me the most painful lesson of my life, in more ways than one. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. I trace my fingers over the raised skin sometimes, feeling the memory of that scalding moment when Tyler upended a cup of boiling water onto my arm. But it wasn't the physical burn that changed everything. It was the words that followed, and the silence from those who should have spoken. That's when I knew it was time to reclaim what was mine. My dignity, my home, my life savings, the future. I'd put on hold for far too long. They thought I was just a convenient babysitter, a built-in housekeeper, a signature on documents I never read. They had no idea what I was about to take from them. Not out of vengeance, but out of something far more powerful: self-respect. I was never supposed to live with my son and his family. That wasn't the plan when Frank passed away 5 years ago. We had built our modest colonial house in Cedar Grove with careful planning. Nothing extravagant, but it was paid for, comfortable, and filled with 43 years of memories. Frank had been meticulous about our finances, making sure I'd be secure even without him. "Ellie," he'd say, "we've worked too hard to worry about tomorrow. The life insurance, our savings, even the small pension from my years as a nurse at Cedar Grove Memorial. It was enough for one person to live comfortably." For the first year after Frank's funeral, that's exactly what I did. I volunteered at the community center 3 days a week, joined a book club, and turned our backyard into the herb garden I'd always wanted but never had time for when working. The neighbors would stop by for fresh basil and stay for coffee. I was creating a new kind of life, quieter, yes, but still mine. Then came Gregory's phone call that changed everything. His voice had that forced cheerfulness that immediately put me on alert. "Mom, we've been thinking. That house is too big for just you. All that maintenance, the stairs. You're not getting any younger." I remember staring at the kitchen wall, where Frank and I had marked the children's heights with pencil marks, Gregory stopping at 17 when he decided it was too childish to continue. "I'm managing fine," I'd told him. "Well, actually." There was a pause, the kind that signals unwelcome news. "Pam and I have been talking. The market's hot right now, and your neighborhood is finally appreciating. If you sold now, you could really maximize your investment." "My house isn't an investment, Greg. It's my home." He sighed that way he does when he thinks I'm being difficult. "Mom, be practical. The money from the sale could help you find a nice little condo. And just hear me out, we could add a suite onto our house. You'd have your own space, but be right here with us. Tyler and Megan would love having you around." What he didn't say, but I heard clearly: "We could use the money from your house. We could use free childcare. We could use someone to cook and clean while Pam and I work." I should have said no firmly then. That was my first mistake. Instead, I said I'd think about it, which Gregory always interprets as eventual agreement. 3 months later, I was installed in the garden suite addition to their sprawling home in Lakeview Estates. My house, the one Frank and I had painted, ourselves, where we'd raised our children, where I'd nursed him through his final illness, was sold. The furniture that didn't fit their aesthetic was quietly disposed of. My garden was bulldozed for the new owner's pool installation. "You'll see, Mom. This is going to be perfect," Gregory assured me as he gave me the tour of my new space. "We've got the intercom system so you can always reach us, and you've got your private entrance." What he meant was that I could come and go without disrupting their lives. "And look, grab bars in the bathroom. We're thinking ahead. I was 63, in perfect health, and suddenly being treated like I was decrepit. The garden suite was lovely in a generic way: neutral beige walls, practical vinyl flooring that looked like wood, a kitchenette with a half-sized refrigerator and two-burner stove. Pam had decorated it with framed inspirational quotes and a few family photos in matching frames. None of the pictures I'd taken myself made the cut. "Do you love it?" Pam asked, her smile wide but her eyes already moving on to the next item on her mental checklist. "It's very nice," I said, which was true. It just wasn't home. I didn't complain when my private entrance began functioning as the family's service. Entrance, with groceries and Amazon deliveries piling up inside my door. I didn't object when "grandma's always here" became the solution to their childcare gaps. I told myself I was being useful, needed. Maybe that's all anyone wants as they age, to feel necessary. The truth settled in gradually. My suite wasn't an apartment. It was a convenient addition to their home where I could be available but invisible until required. The money from my house sale hadn't gone into a separate account for me as promised. Gregory had become the co-signer on my accounts, just in case, and somehow the funds had mingled with their household finances. When I asked about it, he assured me it was all family money anyway, and changed the subject. I kept a brave face. I baked cookies for Tyler's soccer team and helped Megan with her science projects. I prepared meals that would be waiting when everyone got home, cleaned up kitchens I hadn't messed up, and learned to step in seamlessly when Pam texted, "Running late, can you handle dinner?" I pretended not to notice when plans were made without consulting me, even when they directly affected me. Tyler was 13 when I moved in, already taller than me and developing that teenage sullenness. He'd been a sweet child, but something was hardening in him now. I caught glimpses of it in the way he spoke to service workers, the dismissive tone he used with his sister. Megan, at 9, was still affectionate, climbing into my lap for stories until Pam gently suggested she was too big for that now. My days fell into a predictable rhythm. Wake up early to prep breakfast, see the children off to school. Clean up, start dinner preparations, do household laundry, welcome the kids home, supervise homework while finishing dinner, serve the meal, clean up again, retreat to my suite when no longer needed, repeat. Some days I'd catch myself standing at my kitchenette window, staring at the sliver of yard visible from my view, and wondering where Eleanor Wilson had gone. The woman who'd once run the busiest floor at Cedar Grove Memorial with calm efficiency. The woman who'd taken up photography in her 50s and had a small exhibition at the community center. The woman whose laugh Frank said was better than any medicine. On my birthday that first year, I waited all day for some acknowledgement. By late afternoon, I finally received a text from Gregory. "Happy birthday, Mom. Crazy day at work. We'll celebrate this weekend." The weekend came and went without mention. When I gently reminded him, he looked genuinely surprised. "Oh, right. Sorry. Let's plan something soon." We never did. It was Martha Jenkins who remembered. My friend from nursing school showed up with a small cake and a concerned expression. "Ellie," she said as she took in my downsized life, "what's happening here?" I made excuses. "They're just busy." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The kids have so many activities. Gregory and Pam both work such long hours. Martha wasn't buying it. "And what about your hours? When did you sign up to be the unpaid help?" She lowered her voice. "What happened to your savings, Ellie? The pie? House money? Frank's insurance?" "It's complicated," I said, because I couldn't bear to say, "I don't know." Martha took my hands in hers. "Ellie Wilson, you spent 30 years advocating for patients who couldn't speak for themselves. When are you going to advocate for yourself?" I changed the subject, but her words stayed with me, a pebble in my shoe that I couldn't shake loose. The incident with my granddaughter's birthday party was when I first felt the ground shifting beneath me. Pam had planned an elaborate celebration for Megan's 10th birthday. Bouncy castle, catered food, custom cake, 30 classmates invited. The estimated cost made my eyes widen, but I kept quiet. It wasn't my place to comment on their spending decisions, even if part of that money had once been mine. The morning of the party, Pam was frantic with last-minute details. "Eleanor," she said, she always used my full name when issuing directives, "can you handle the goodie bags? They need to be stuffed and tied with those purple ribbons. Oh, and the caterers might be early. Can you direct them to set up by the ER?" "Pool?" "Of course," I said, as I always did. The party was in full swing when I overheard Pam talking to Nancy Peterson, her mother, by the drinks table. I was refilling the ice bucket, effectively invisible. "The party is gorgeous," Nancy said. "You always go above and beyond, Pam." Pam sighed dramatically. "It's been so much work. I've been planning this for months." "Well, at least you have Eleanor to help with the heavy lifting." "Thank God," Pam laughed. "I don't know what we'd do without her. Greg says she's the best investment we ever made." Investment. The word hit me like a slap. An investment yields returns. An investment is something you use to profit yourself. I stood there, ice scoop suspended in midair, as Pam continued. "It was actually perfect timing when we convinced her to sell her house. We were outgrowing this place, and the market was just right to add the extension. And having built-in childcare has saved us a fortune." Nancy lowered her voice, but not enough. "And her finances? Is Greg still managing those?" "Completely. She doesn't have the first clue. Half her pension goes into our household account for expenses. But honestly, how much does she cost? She barely leaves the house." I must have made some small sound because they both turned. Nancy had the grace to look embarrassed. Pam just smiled brightly. "Eleanor, we need more lemonade when you get a chance." That night, after everyone was in bed, I sat at my small desk and did something I should have done months earlier. I started looking for my financial papers. What I found, or rather didn't find, sent a chill through me. I couldn't locate my pension statements. My banking information was missing. Even the life insurance documentation was nowhere to be found. Everything had been gradually removed from my possession. The next morning, I called the bank directly. After verifying my identity, the customer service representative confirmed my worst fears. "Mrs. Wilson, it appears your son Gregory is now the primary account holder. You're listed as a secondary user." When I asked about the balance, there was an uncomfortable pause. "The current balance is $4,167.42. The proceeds from my house sale had been $287,000. Frank's life insurance had been $150,000. My pension deposited $2,400 monthly. The math didn't add up, not even close." I hung up, hands shaking. I couldn't confront Gregory yet, not without understanding the full picture. I needed help, but I wasn't ready to admit to Martha how bad things had gotten. Instead, I called my sister Judy. "Ellie," she said after I explained as much as I understood. "This isn't right. You need to talk to someone, a lawyer maybe." "I can't afford a lawyer," I said, then realized the bitter irony of that statement. "Use my guy," Judy insisted. "Daniel Cohen. He specializes in elder law. I'll pay for the consultation." I agreed reluctantly, feeling a confusing mix of betrayal and shame. Had I been so desperate for family connection that I'd allowed this to happen? Or had I been cleverly manipulated by a son who'd learned I couldn't say no to him? I met Daniel Cohen at a coffee shop 20 minutes from Gregory's house. I didn't want to risk anyone seeing us together. Daniel was kind but direct, taking notes as I explained my situation. "Mrs. Wilson, what you're describing has elements of financial exploitation," he said carefully. "Even when family members are involved, especially when family members are involved, there are legal protections for your assets. I don't want to get Gregory in trouble, I said automatically, then wondered why I was still protecting him. Daniel's expression was gentle. Mrs. Wilson, based on what you've told me, your son has already gotten himself in trouble. The question is whether you want to recover what's rightfully yours. I left with homework. Gather any financial records. I could find request statements directly from institutions and document the timeline of events since Frank's death. Daniel also suggested I start keeping a journal of my daily activities to establish the value of the services I was providing to the household. Over the next 2 weeks, I became a detective in my own life. I discovered that my name had been removed from most of my accounts. The house proceeds had been mostly absorbed into Gregory and Pam's mortgage to add my suite and remodel their kitchen and master bath. My pension was indeed being partially diverted to their household account. Frank's life insurance money had been used for family investments that seemed remarkably similar to Gregory's personal stock portfolio. I documented everything meticulously in a notebook I kept hidden beneath my mattress like a teenager with secrets. Each entry made me more certain I needed to reclaim my independence. But how? I had no home to return to. My finances were entangled with theirs. And despite everything, they were still my family. The situation might have continued indefinitely if not for what happened on a sweltering Tuesday in July. I was preparing dinner. A complicated pasta dish that Pam had texted was absolutely essential for a dinner with Howard and Nancy Peterson that evening. Apparently, Howard had mentioned loving authentic Italian cuisine, and Pam was determined to impress her in-laws. The kitchen was stifling despite the air conditioning. I had multiple pots going, sauce simmering, water boiling for pasta, vegetables roasting in the oven. I'd been at it for hours, having made the pasta dough from scratch and rolled it by hand since Pam insisted that was the authentic method. Tyler slouched into the kitchen, his tall frame radiating teenage discontent. At 14, he'd mastered the art of making others feel they were inconveniencing him simply by existing in his space. "What's for dinner?" he asked, without looking up from his phone. "Homemade pappardelle with bolognese sauce," I answered, wiping sweat from my forehead. "Your dad's parents are coming over, remember?" He grunted, yanking open the refrigerator door and standing in front of it, letting the cold air pour out. "Is there any Red Bull?" "No, your mother doesn't want you drinking those. There's lemonade I made this morning." He slammed the refrigerator. "Shut." "That's stupid. Dad drinks them." "Your father is 42, Tyler. You're 14. He rolled his eyes dramatically and slouched toward the electric kettle. "Whatever. I need hot water for ramen." "Dinner will be ready in less than an hour," I said, turning back to the sauce that needed stirring. "And I'd rather you didn't fill up on instant noodles beforehand." "It's not like I want your pasta anyway," he muttered, loudly enough to make sure I heard. "Mom says you overcook it." I paused, wooden spoon suspended over the pot. "Your mother said that?" "Yeah. She told Grandma Nancy that she has to fix everything you cook before serving it to guests. She said that's why she can only trust you with basic family meals." The casual cruelty of the comment stung, but I kept my voice even. "Well, everyone has different tastes. The water's already boiling if you really need it for your ramen." I turned back to the stove, focusing on the task at hand rather than the hurt bubbling beneath my calm exterior. I heard Tyler move behind me, the clicking of the kettle being lifted from its base. Then, suddenly, a searing, white-hot sensation on my right forearm. Pain so intense it took a moment to register what had happened. Hot water cascaded down my arm, soaking my sleeve and splashing onto the floor. I cried out, more in shock than pain initially, though the pain followed swiftly. Tyler stood frozen, the empty kettle still tilted in his hand, his eyes wide with what might have been surprise or fear, but not, I noted even through my pain, remorse. "Grandma, you were in my way," he said defensively, already constructing his narrative. I said, "Excuse me." He hadn't said a word. We both knew it. I rushed to the sink, thrusting my arm under cold running water as the burn began to blister almost immediately. The scalding water had soaked through my thin cotton sleeve, creating an angry red patch from just below my elbow to my wrist. "What's going on in here?" Gregory appeared in the doorway, drawn by my cry of pain. "Mom? Tyler?" "Grandma got burned," Tyler said, setting down the kettle with exaggerated care. "She backed into me when I was carrying hot water." I looked up from the sink, water still running over my increasingly painful arm, and stared at my grandson. The lie came so easily to him. What shocked me more was the realization that it wasn't the first time, just the first time I'd caught it so clearly. "That's not what happened," I said quietly. Gregory glanced between us, his expression already settling into annoyance at having to deal with this disruption. "Let me see," he said, approaching the sink. He examined my arm with clinical detachment. "You'll need to keep that under cold water for at least 15 minutes. It looks like a second-degree burn." "Tyler poured the water on me," I said, my voice steadier than I expected. He was upset that I suggested he wait for dinner instead of eating ramen. Gregory's expression tightened. He turned to Tyler. "Is that true?" "No way," Tyler protested. Outrage perfectly performed. She wasn't looking where she was going. She backed right into me. He gestured at the floor. "Look at the water. It splashed everywhere when she bumped me." Gregory studied the splatter pattern on the floor for a moment, then sighed. "Mom, you need to be more careful in the kitchen. You know Tyler isn't always paying attention." I stared at my son, water still running over my throbbing arm. "You don't believe me." A flicker of discomfort crossed his face. "I didn't say that. Accidents happen. The important thing is to take care of that burn." He reached for a clean kitchen towel. "Here, pat it dry gently and I'll get the first aid kit." "Gregory," I said, using his full name deliberately. "Your son deliberately poured boiling water on me, and then he lied about it. And you're choosing to believe him." Tyler's face darkened. "Whatever. I'm out of here." He stalked toward the door, pausing only to add, "This is why nobody wants you." "Here, Grandma. You're always causing problems." Gregory called after him half-heartedly. "Tyler, come back and apologize," but made no move to follow when Tyler ignored him and thundered up the stairs. I shut off the water and carefully patted my arm dry, wincing at the contact. The burn was already forming blisters, the skin an angry red that would soon become the scar I now carry. "You need to discipline your son," I said quietly. Gregory's expression hardened. "Mom, I know you're in pain, but let's not blow this out of proportion. Tyler's going through a difficult phase." "A difficult phase doesn't excuse assaulting his grandmother." "Assaulting?" Gregory's eyebrows shot up. "It was an accident." "It wasn't," I insisted. "He was angry, and he deliberately poured water on me." "I saw his face, Greg. He meant to hurt me." "Now you're being ridiculous," Gregory snapped. "Why? Would Tyler want to hurt you? You're making a victim narrative out of a kitchen accident." At that moment, Pam walked in, her face falling as she surveyed the scene. Me clutching my burned arm, Gregory tense and defensive, the abandoned pots on the stove beginning to boil over. "What happened?" she asked, rushing to turn off the burners. "Eleanor, what about dinner? My parents will be here in less than an hour." I looked from my son to my daughter-in-law, both more concerned with their evening plans than with what had just occurred in their kitchen, with their son, to their mother. Something crystallized in that moment, a clarity so sharp it almost overshadowed the physical pain. This wasn't my home. These weren't my pots. That wasn't my money funding their lifestyle. I had allowed myself to become a convenience, a resource to be used and discarded. Worst of all, I had modeled for my grandchildren that this was an acceptable way to treat another human being. "I'm not finishing dinner," I said quietly. "I need to take care of my burn. You'll have to handle your parents yourselves." Pam's mouth fell open. "But what am I supposed to serve them? You know I can't make pasta from scratch." "That sounds like a you problem, Pam," I replied, surprising myself with the steadiness in my voice. "I have a me problem to deal with right now." I walked out of the kitchen, leaving them both staring after me in disbelief. In my suite, I carefully applied burn cream and bandaged my arm, my mind racing ahead to what needed to happen next. I hadn't planned to leave today, but suddenly I couldn't bear to spend another night under their roof. I called Judy. "I need to come stay with you," I said when she answered. "Today. Now." "What happened?" Alarm filled her voice. "Tyler burned me with boiling water deliberately. Neither Greg nor Pam believes me or cares." My voice finally broke. "I can't do this anymore, Judy. I need out." "I'm coming to get you," she said without hesitation. "Pack what you absolutely need. The rest we can figure out later." As I moved around my small suite, selecting essentials to take with me, I could hear raised voices from the main house. Pam was crying about the ruined dinner. Gregory was on the phone ordering takeout. No one came to check on me. I found a small duffel bag in my closet and filled it methodically. A few changes of clothes, toiletries, medications, my hidden notebook of financial documentation, and the one photo album I'd managed to keep in my possession. I added Frank's watch and our wedding rings, items I'd been saving for my grandchildren, but now questioned whether they deserved such meaningful heirlooms. Just as I zipped the bag closed, there was a soft knock at my door. I opened it to find Megan standing there, her small face solemn. "Are you okay, Grandma?" she asked, eyes fixed on my bandaged arm. I knelt to her level, forcing a smile. "I'll be fine, sweetheart. It's just a burn. It hurts, but it will heal." She frowned. "Tyler said it was your fault." "Do you believe that?" She hesitated, loyalty to her brother warring with what she'd likely witnessed. "I don't know. But Mom and Dad believe him." I nodded, unsurprised. "Sometimes adults make mistakes too, Megan. Sometimes they choose what's easier to believe, rather than what's true. Are you leaving?" She pointed to the duffel bag visible on my bed. "Just for a little while. I'm going to visit Aunt Judy." Her lower lip trembled. "Because of Tyler? Because I need some time to think about what's best for all of us." I touched her cheek gently, "Including what's best for you and what kind of person you're learning to be." "Will you come back?" I couldn't lie to her. "I don't know yet, honey." She nodded, wise beyond her years. "If you don't, can I still visit you?" "Always," I promised, hugging her carefully to avoid pressuring my injured arm. "No matter what happens with the grown-ups, you and I will always be connected." After Megan left, I sat on the edge of my bed, staring at the beige walls of my garden suite. This bland, impersonal space had never been home. It had been a holding cell. And somehow, my grandson's act of cruelty had become the key that unlocked the door. When Judy's car pulled into the driveway 40 minutes later, I was ready. I didn't sneak out. I walked directly through the main house, past the dining room where Gregory, Pam, and the Petersons were picking at expensive takeout, displayed on my best serving platters. "Mom?" Gregory stood as I passed, taking in the duffel bag and my determined expression. "What are you doing?" "I'm leaving, Gregory," I said simply. "I'm going to stay with Judy while I figure out my next steps." Pam looked up, alarmed. "Leaving? But what about the children's schedules? I have 3 showings tomorrow." I almost laughed at the absurdity of her concern. My arm throbbed beneath its bandage, and all she could think about was her inconvenience. "You'll have to figure it out," I said, echoing my earlier statement. Just like you'll have to figure out where the money went from my house sale, my pension, and Frank's life insurance. The color drained from Gregory's face. Mom, what are you talking about? We've been taking care of you. No, I replied, surprised by the calm certainty in my voice. You've been taking from me. There's a difference. Howard and Nancy Peterson sat frozen, forks suspended in midair, witnessing family drama they clearly wished to avoid. Ellie, Nancy began tentatively, I'm sure whatever misunderstanding. There's no misunderstanding, I cut her off. Your grandson assaulted me today. Your son and daughter-in-law have systematically appropriated my life savings. And until about an hour ago, I was too ashamed to admit how completely I'd allowed it to happen. Gregory stepped toward me, lowering his voice. Mom, you're upset. You're not thinking clearly. Let's talk about this tomorrow when you've calmed down. I'm completely calm, I said, and realized it was true. The clarity I felt was like nothing I'd experienced since Frank died. And I'm more clear-headed than I've been in years. Judy's waiting for me. I turned to go, but Gregory grabbed my injured arm, causing me to gasp in pain. You can't just walk out. What will people think? I looked down at his hand on my bandaged burn, then up at his face. So like Frank's in features, so unlike him in character. Let go of my arm, Gregory. Unless you want to explain to the police why you're physically restraining an injured senior citizen. He released me immediately, stepping back as if I'd threatened him with a weapon. In a way, I had. The strongest weapon I possessed, the truth about who they really were and what they'd done. This isn't over, he said, his voice low and warning. You're right about that, I agreed, turning to leave. In fact, it's just beginning. As I walked, out the front door toward Judy's waiting car, my arm throbbing with each step, I felt something unexpected beneath the pain and betrayal, a flicker of liberation. I had lost my home, my savings, and perhaps even my relationship with my son. But in this moment of leaving, I was reclaiming something far more precious, my dignity, and they had no idea what I was about to take back from them. Judy's cottage on Lake Huron was exactly what I needed. Perched on a small bluff overlooking the water, it was nothing fancy, just a 2-bedroom retreat with weathered cedar siding and a wide porch that caught the evening breeze. Far from the manicured perfection of Lakeview Estates, the cottage felt authentic, real. The screen door creaked, the floorboards had character, and nothing matched in the kitchen. I loved it immediately. You can stay as long as you want, Judy said as she carried my bag to the smaller bedroom. I'm not using this place enough anyway. I stood at the window, watching waves lap against the rocky shore below. My bandaged arm throbbed dully, a constant reminder of why I was here. I don't know what happens next, I admitted. Judy set my bag on the bed and joined me at the window. 5 years older than me, she'd always been the practical one, the sister, who spoke plainly and saw clearly. What happens next is you get your money back, she said simply, and then you decide what kind of life you want. That night, I slept more soundly than I had in months, maybe years. No listening for the intercom, no mentally preparing the next day's meals, no calculating how to stretch my dwindling personal funds until the next pension deposit. Just the sound of waves and the knowledge that tomorrow belonged to me. Morning brought reality in the form of multiple text messages from Gregory. They began with concern. Mom, where are you? Are you safe? Quickly progressed to annoyance. You can't just disappear without telling us your plans. And ended with barely veiled threats. If you're not capable of making responsible decisions, we'll need to consider other arrangements. I showed the messages to Judy over coffee on the porch. She read them silently, her expression darkening. He's worried about his free childcare disappearing, she said finally. And possibly about what you might say to whom. I've been such a fool, I said, watching a pair of gulls circle over the lake. I handed everything over to him, my home, my money, my independence. How did I not see what was happening? Judy squeezed my hand. Because he's your son and you wanted to trust him. That's not foolish, Ellie. That's human. Frank would be so disappointed in me. No, Judy's voice was firm. Frank would be furious at Gregory, not you, and he'd be proud of you for walking out that door yesterday. She was right, of course. Frank had always admired backbone. It was one of the things he'd loved about me when we first met, my willingness to stand up for my patients, to question doctors when necessary, to put what was right above what was comfortable. Somewhere along the way, I'd lost that part of myself. It was time to find it again. Daniel Cohen, the lawyer Judy had recommended, agreed to meet us at the cottage rather than his office. Less chance of your family intercepting you, he explained. When he arrived, setting his briefcase on Judy's kitchen table. From what you've described, I wouldn't put it past them to monitor your movements. I'd spent the morning organizing what little documentation I had, supplemented by the notes, in my hidden journal. Daniel reviewed everything methodically, occasionally asking for clarification, but mostly listening as I detailed the progression of events that had led to my current situation. Mrs. Wilson, he said finally, closing his legal pad, based on what you've shown me, we have a strong case for financial exploitation. The house sale proceeds, your pension diversion, the life insurance funds. These were not gifts. They were not loans. They were misappropriated. Will I have to go to court? The thought of facing Gregory across a courtroom made my stomach twist. Potentially, but that would be a last resort. Our first step will be formally documenting everything that's happened, then sending a demand letter for return of funds. Many cases like this settle once the exploiter realizes their actions have been exposed. Gregory won't just hand over the money, I said, certain of at least this much about my son. He'll deny everything. Daniel smiled thinly. That's why we'll be simultaneously filing for financial discovery, freezing accounts, and possibly seeking conservatorship reversal. The law provides tools specifically for cases like yours, Mrs. Wilson. Call me Ellie, please. Ellie, he amended. One more thing. The incident with your grandson. You mentioned you're considering pressing charges? I touched my bandaged arm unconsciously. The burn still hurt, but the pain of Tyler's deliberate cruelty cut deeper. I don't know, I admitted. He's 14. I don't want to ruin his life over one terrible decision. While I understand that sentiment, Daniel said carefully, documenting the incident officially could strengthen our case regarding your overall treatment in that household. It establishes a pattern of harm. I nodded slowly. I'll think about it. After Daniel left, Judy and I sat on the porch again, watching afternoon turn to evening over the lake. You know they'll fight back, she said not unkindly. Gregory, Pam, possibly even Tyler with some story his parents have fed him. I know. Are you ready for that? I considered the question seriously. Was I prepared for the ugliness that would likely follow? The accusations, the character assassination, the inevitable framing of me as a confused old woman who didn't understand what was happening, the potential estrangement from my grandchildren? I think I have to be, I said finally. Not just for me, but for Frank, for what we built together. He wouldn't want Gregory spending our life's work on kitchen renovations and private school, tuition while treating me like an inconvenience. That night, I removed the bandage from my arm to apply fresh ointment. The burn was healing, but the skin remained angry and blistered. I studied it in the bathroom mirror, this physical manifestation of everything that had gone wrong. In nursing, we'd been taught that scarring was part of the healing process, the body knitting itself back together, sometimes imperfectly, but always with purpose. Perhaps emotional healing worked the same way. The next morning, I received an email from our family doctor, Dr. Sanderson. The subject line read simply, "Concerned about you." I opened it with trepidation. "Eleanor," it began, "I received a concerning call from Gregory yesterday. He believes you may be experiencing some cognitive decline and decision-making difficulties. He mentioned you left the house suddenly after an accident in the kitchen and have been making accusations about financial matters. He's asked me to evaluate you for possible early-stage dementia. Please call my office to schedule an appointment at your earliest convenience." My hands trembled as I showed the email to Judy. "This is what he's doing? Claiming I have dementia?" Judy's expression hardened. "It's a classic move. Discredit you before you can make your accusations public. If he can get a doctor to document even the slightest concern about your cognitive state, he'll use it to maintain control of your finances. Dr. Sanderson has been our family physician for 20 years. Surely he wouldn't just take Gregory's word for this? You'd be surprised how convincing concerned adult children can be," Judy said grimly. "Call Daniel. He needs to know about this immediately." Daniel wasn't surprised. "Unfortunately, this is a common tactic in elder exploitation cases," he explained over the phone. "If you're comfortable with it, I suggest you schedule the appointment with Dr. Sanderson, but request that I accompany you as your advocate. Being willing to undergo the evaluation shows you have nothing to hide, and having legal representation prevents any potential manipulation of the process." The appointment was set for the following week. In the meantime, Daniel worked quickly to file emergency motions to freeze Gregory's access to my remaining accounts and to initiate the discovery process for all financial transactions related to my assets over the past 3 years. Gregory's reaction was swift and predictable. His text escalated from concern to anger to threats. "Mom, I don't know what you think you're doing, but freezing our accounts is completely uncalled for. We have bills to pay. We've always handled your money in your best interest. I can't believe you're doing this to your own family. If you continue down this path, you're going to damage your relationship with your grandchildren permanently. Is that what you want?" I didn't respond to any of them. Daniel had advised against direct communication that could be taken out of context, and I found I had nothing left to say to my son anyway. What could I possibly tell him that would make him understand the depth of his betrayal? That would help him see me as a person with rights and dignity, rather than a resource to be exploited. Instead, I focused on healing, both my arm and my sense of self. Each morning, I walked along the lakeshore, breathing in the fresh air and remembering who Eleanor Wilson had been before she became merely grandma. The nurse who had advocated fiercely for her patients. The wife who had built a partnership of equals with Frank. The woman who had once had dreams of her own. Judy joined me on these walks when she could, offering silent companionship or gentle conversation, depending on what I seemed to need. One morning, about a week after my arrival, she brought along an old Nikon camera. "Found this in the closet," she said, handing it to me. "Still works. Thought you might want to get back to it." I turned the camera over in my hands, feeling its solid weight. Photography had been my passion once, before Gregory's suggestions. That it was an expensive hobby, and Pam's comments about clutter from all those camera things had led me to pack it all away. "I'm not sure I remember how," I admitted. Judy shrugged. "So you'll take some bad pictures until you remember." What's the harm? That simple question, "What's the harm?" became my mantra as I cautiously began reclaiming pieces of myself. What was the harm in taking photographs again? In reading novels instead of just cookbooks? In spending an entire afternoon watching the lake without preparing anyone's dinner? Or folding anyone's laundry? The day before my appointment with Dr. Sanderson, I received an unexpected visitor. Pam's silver SUV pulled up to Judy's cottage just after lunch, sending a jolt of anxiety through me. I watched from the window as she checked her reflection in the rearview mirror, applied lipstick, and plastered on a smile before approaching the door. Judy answered her knock. "Pamela, this is a surprise." "Hello, Judith." Pam's voice carried that forced brightness I knew so well. "I was hoping to speak with Eleanor. Just a quick hello." Judy glanced back at me questioningly. I nodded. I wasn't afraid of Pam, and perhaps it was better to hear whatever they'd sent her to say directly. "Eleanor!" Pam's smile widened as she entered, eyes scanning the cottage with barely disguised judgment. "We've been so worried. How's your arm healing?" "It's fine," I said, not offering further details or inviting her to sit. "What can I do for you, Pam?" Her smile faltered slightly at my directness. "Well, we thought we should talk before things get any more complicated. Gregory is so upset about this misunderstanding with the accounts. He's always had your best interests at heart, you know that. Is that why he's trying to have me declared incompetent?" Pam's eyes widened in feigned shock. "That's not it at all. He's genuinely concerned about your mental state. The accusations, the sudden departure. It's not like you, Eleanor." "No," I agreed. "It's not like the compliant, invisible person I became in your house. It's like the real me." Pam's pleasant facade cracked slightly. "Look, I didn't come here to argue. I came with an offer." She pulled an envelope from her purse and set it on the coffee table. "Gregory is willing to set up a proper, separate account for you. A generous monthly allowance, completely under your control. And of course, your suite is still waiting whenever you're ready to come home." I stared at the envelope without touching it. An allowance. From my own money. It's not that simple, Eleanor. The house funds were used for the addition, which is a permanent part of our home now, and some investments are tied up. But Gregory can arrange for you to have complete transparency going forward. "Going forward?" I repeated. "And the thousands that have already been spent? My pension payments that were diverted? Frank's life insurance?" Pam's smile turned brittle. "I think we both know pursuing that would only hurt everyone involved. The children miss you. Megan cries at night. Even Tyler feels terrible about the accident." "It wasn't an accident." "Children exaggerate, Eleanor. They get confused about what really happened, especially in emotional moments." She gestured to the envelope. "Just look at the offer. It's very generous. A clean slate for everyone." I picked up the envelope, weighing it in my hand. Then I handed it back to her. "No." Pam blinked. "You haven't even looked at it." "I don't need to. I'm not interested in an allowance from my own money, Pam. I want everything that was taken from me returned, with interest and a full accounting of where it went." "That's not possible, and you know it." Pam's composure finally slipped. "We've used that money. It's gone into the house, the children's education, our lifestyle." "Exactly," I said quietly. "You used it without my permission. That's called theft." Pam stood abruptly, color rising in her cheeks. "You ungrateful. Do you have any idea what we've done for you? The sacrifices we've made? You were alone, Eleanor. We gave you a home, a purpose. You gave me a servant's quarters and exploited my labor and my finances," I corrected her. "And now you're trying to buy me off with pocket money." "This is Gregory's doing," Pam hissed, gathering her purse. "He insisted we try reasoning with you before the lawyers take over. I told him you were too far gone, listening to Judith and her ridiculous ideas about independence. You think you can start over at your age, without us?" I felt a calm certainty settle over me. "Yes, Pam, that's exactly what I think." After she stormed out, Judy emerged from the kitchen where she'd tactfully retreated during the confrontation. "Well, that went about as expected." "They're scared," I said, watching Pam's SUV disappear down the road. "They didn't think I'd actually fight back." "Good," Judy said firmly. "They should be scared." My appointment with Dr. Sanderson the next day went better than I'd feared. Daniel accompanied me as planned, introducing himself as my legal representative and explaining that we were aware of Gregory's concerns. "I'm happy to undergo any cognitive assessment you deem necessary," I told Dr. Sanderson, "but I wanted on record that I believe this request is part of an attempt to discredit me as I pursue recovery of misappropriated funds." Dr. Sanderson looked uncomfortable, but professional. "I understand, Eleanor. For the record, I haven't observed any concerning cognitive symptoms in our regular appointments, but given the family concerns, it's appropriate to do a thorough evaluation." The testing took nearly 2 hours. Memory assessments, problem-solving exercises, questions about current events and personal history. I answered everything calmly and completely, refusing to let anxiety affect my performance. Daniel remained present throughout, taking his own notes and occasionally clarifying questions. "Well," Dr. Sanderson said finally, reviewing his notes, "I see no indication of cognitive impairment whatsoever. Your scores are actually above average for your age group in several categories. Will you document that officially?" Daniel asked. "Of course. I'll prepare a formal report stating that Mrs. Wilson shows no signs of cognitive decline and appears fully capable of managing her own affairs and making informed decisions." In the parking lot afterward, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. "One hurdle down," I said to Daniel. "A significant one," he agreed. "Gregory's attempt to question your competency has backfired. Dr. Sanderson's report will strengthen our position considerably." Over the next few weeks, the legal process moved forward with agonizing slowness. Daniel filed formal demands for financial restitution. Gregory's lawyer responded with denials and counter-accusations. Financial discovery revealed exactly what I'd feared: systematic siphoning of my assets into Gregory and Pam's lifestyle. The house proceeds, my pension, Frank's insurance, all had been gradually absorbed into their household economy. "They're claiming everything was done with your verbal consent," Daniel explained during one of our regular update meetings at Judy's cottage. "That you wanted to contribute to the family and explicitly approved all expenditures. That's absurd. I never would have agreed to spend my entire savings on their kitchen renovation or private school tuition." "I know. But without written documentation of your objections at the time, it becomes your word against theirs." I thought, back to all the times I'd swallowed my questions, accepted vague explanations, chosen peace over confrontation. How easily that conflict avoidance had been weaponized against me. "What about the new financial evidence?" Judy asked. "Surely that proves something." Daniel nodded. "It establishes a pattern consistent with financial exploitation. The timing of transfers, the gradual escalation, the complete absorption of funds. These are red flags any judge would recognize. And we have the conservatorship issue as well." That had been perhaps the most shocking discovery of the financial investigation. Gregory had somehow obtained a limited conservatorship over my affairs shortly after I moved into their home, claiming it was just a formality to help manage household expenses. I had no memory of signing such documents, raising the disturbing possibility that my signature had been forged, or that I'd been tricked into signing something I didn't understand. "The good news," Daniel continued, "is that between Dr. Sanderson's evaluation and the evidence of financial impropriety, we have strong grounds to have the conservatorship revoked immediately. Once that happens, Gregory loses his legal control over your accounts." "And recovery of the funds?" I asked. Daniel's expression grew more measured. "That will be more challenging. Some assets, like the house addition, can't be easily liquidated. We'll likely need to negotiate a settlement." I absorbed this reality slowly. I might never recover everything that had been taken from me. The realization didn't devastate me as it might have weeks earlier. Money could be rebuilt. What mattered more was regaining control of my life and establishing boundaries that could never again be violated. "There's one more thing," Daniel said, pulling a folder from his briefcase. "I've been consulting with a colleague who specializes in elder protection. Given what happened with your grandson and the subsequent attempt to declare you incompetent, we recommend seeking a protection order." Against Tyler? The thought made my heart ache despite everything. Against all of them, at least temporarily. It would legally prevent them from approaching you, contacting you, or making decisions about your care without going through proper channels. I stared out at the lake, watching sunlight play across the waves. That seems so extreme. "It's precautionary," Daniel explained gently. "We've seen cases where family members become desperate once legal proceedings begin. The protection order creates a buffer while we resolve the financial matters." That evening, alone on the porch with just the sound of waves for company, I grappled with how much had changed in such a short time. Weeks ago, I had been preparing meals in Gregory's kitchen, caring for his children, living in a state of quiet resignation. Now I was contemplating legal action that would formalize the breach between us. Had I gone too far? Was financial justice worth the family relationships that might be permanently damaged? As if in answer to my unspoken questions, my phone buzzed, with a text from Megan, sent via Judy's number since I'd changed my own. "Grandma, are you ever coming back? Dad says you're confused and need help, but you didn't seem confused to me. I miss you." Tears pricked my eyes as I read her simple message. Megan, at least, saw me clearly, not as property or a resource, but as a person she cared about. I typed back carefully. "I miss you too, sweetheart. I'm not confused. I'm making some changes that are difficult but necessary. I hope you'll understand someday. I'll always be your grandmother, no matter where I live." I paused, then added, "Remember what we talked about. Being the kind of person you want to be, not just who others expect. I'm trying to follow that advice myself." The reply came quickly. "Dad says I can't talk to you anymore. He took my phone. This is from Aunt Judy's at piano lesson. I have to go." I set down my phone, a fresh wave of determination washing over. Mousy, this wasn't just about money or even dignity anymore. It was about truth. What lesson would Megan learn if I surrendered now? That standing up for yourself was less important than keeping peace. That family relationships justified exploitation. That women, especially aging women, should accept whatever treatment they received with gratitude? No. I would not teach her that by example. I sent a text to Daniel. "I'll sign the protection order paperwork tomorrow." The legal process accelerated after that. The protection order was granted based on the documented burn injury and the evidence of financial exploitation. The conservatorship was suspended pending a full hearing, with temporary financial oversight assigned to an independent court appointee rather than returned to me immediately, a precaution the judge deemed necessary given the complexity of the situation. Gregory's response was a public relations campaign within our extended family and social circle. Suddenly, distant relatives and old acquaintances began reaching out with concerned messages. "Eleanor, we're so worried about you. Gregory says you've fallen under some bad influence. Is it true you're refusing medical treatment? Everyone just wants what's best for you. Why put the family through this stress at your age? Wouldn't it be easier to work things out privately?" Each message revealed how thoroughly Gregory had controlled the narrative. In his version, I was the irrational one, the ungrateful mother turning on the son who had generously taken her in. The financial details were conveniently omitted or dismissed as family arrangements that outsiders couldn't possibly understand. Some days, the weight of being cast as the villain in my own story felt crushing. I would sit by the lake, camera forgotten in my lap, wondering if the fight was worth the cost. On those days, Judy would gently remind me of what was at stake. "This isn't just about you, Ellie," she'd say. "It's about every older person who gets pushed aside, whose autonomy gets stripped away bit by bit until there's nothing left. You're fighting for all of them, too." Slowly, I began rebuilding my life beyond the legal battle. With Daniel's help, I secured access to a portion of my remaining funds, enough to cover immediate needs while the case proceeded. I began volunteering at the small local library, shelving books and helping with children's reading hour. I joined a photography group that met weekly to share techniques and explore the shoreline with our cameras. Each small step toward independence strengthened my resolve to see the legal process through, no matter how difficult. This wasn't a rash decision made in the heat of anger after Tyler's attack. It was a deliberate reclaiming of the life I deserved. The life Frank and I had carefully built together, the life I had nearly lost through a combination of manipulation and my own reluctance to acknowledge what was happening. The court date for the conservatorship hearing arrived on a crisp autumn morning. I dressed carefully in a navy suit I'd purchased secondhand and restyled, professional but not flashy, dignified without appearing stuffy. Judy drove me to the courthouse, where Daniel waited on the steps. "Are you ready?" he asked, briefcase in hand. I took a deep breath, looking up at the imposing building where my future would be decided. "Yes," I said. "I've been ready for longer than I realized." We entered together, my steps firm and my head high. Whatever happened inside, I would face it as Eleanor Wilson, not as grandma or mom or any other role that had been used to diminish me. I was a complete person with rights, dignity, and a voice that deserved to be heard. And if Gregory, Pam, and their lawyers thought I would crumble under pressure or accept another inadequate offer to make the problem go away, they were about to discover just how wrong they were. The woman walking into that courtroom wasn't the same one who had slipped quietly into their garden suite, grateful for whatever scraps of attention and respect came her way. That woman was gone. And in her place stood someone far stronger. Someone who understood that true family doesn't exploit vulnerability but honors it. Someone who recognized that the greatest theft hadn't been of money but of autonomy. Someone who was ready to reclaim everything that had been taken, beginning with her own power. The courtroom felt smaller than I'd imagined. Polished wooden, benches, the subtle scent of lemon polish, and the quiet rustle of papers created an atmosphere of restrained formality. I sat beside Daniel at the plaintiff's table, my hands folded in my lap to disguise their slight trembling. Across the aisle, Gregory and his attorney had just arrived, deliberately not looking in my direction. My son had aged somehow in the weeks since I'd left. Fine lines bracketed his mouth, and his normally impeccable appearance showed subtle signs of strain, a slightly crooked tie, hair not quite perfectly combed. Part of me ached at the sight, maternal instinct flaring despite everything. Another part recognized this transformation for what it was, the visible manifestation of consequences finally catching up to him. Judge Miranda Oakes entered, a woman, in her 60s with silver-streaked hair pulled into a severe bun and reading glasses perched on her nose. We rose, then sat at her direction. She reviewed the case documents silently for several minutes, occasionally making notes before addressing the courtroom. "This is a hearing regarding the conservatorship of Eleanor Wilson," she stated, looking up over her glasses. "I've reviewed the filings from both parties. Before we proceed with arguments, I want to be clear about what's at stake here. This court takes the autonomy of senior citizens extremely seriously. Conservatorships are meant to protect vulnerable individuals, not to facilitate control or exploitation." I felt a flicker of hope at her words. At least she was approaching this with the right perspective. "Mr. Cohen," she continued, nodding to Daniel, "you may begin your argument for dissolving the conservatorship." Daniel rose smoothly. "Thank you, Your Honor. The facts in this case are straightforward. Approximately 2 years ago, a limited conservatorship was established, giving Gregory Wilson control over his mother's finances. According to Mrs. Wilson, she was either not fully informed of what she was signing or did not sign the documents at all. He detailed the progression of events, my house sale, the gradual absorption of my assets into Gregory's household finances, the systematic diversion of my pension, and the lack of transparency throughout the process. Most damning, Daniel continued, is the timing of Mr. Wilson's sudden concern about his mother's cognitive abilities, which coincidentally emerged only after she began questioning the disposition of her assets and sought legal counsel. The eye medical evaluation conducted by Dr. Sanderson, Mrs. Wilson's physician of 20 years, found no cognitive impairment whatsoever. He submitted Dr. Sanderson's report as evidence. Gregory's attorney, a sleek woman named Vanessa Hewitt, countered with arguments about family arrangements and verbal agreements. She portrayed me as a willing participant in household financial decisions who had suddenly changed my mind, painting Gregory as a devoted son blindsided by my erratic behavior. Mrs. Wilson's departure from the family home after a minor kitchen accident, her sudden accusations, and her refusal to communicate directly with her son all point to judgment. Issues that merit continued oversight, she argued. Mr. Wilson has only ever acted in his mother's best interest, providing her with housing, care, and family connection. When it was my turn to speak, I rose slowly, conscious of every eye in the courtroom. Your Honor, I began, my voice steadier than I'd feared it might be. I'm not an attorney or financial expert. I'm a retired nurse who trusted her son. That trust was misplaced. I held up my arm, where the burn still showed its healing edges. This minor kitchen accident, Ms. Hewitt referenced, was my 14-year-old grandson deliberately pouring boiling water on me. When I reported this to my son, he chose to believe his son's lie rather than what I told him happened. I paused, gathering my thoughts. This incident opened my eyes to a pattern I'd been ignoring. For 2 years, I've been treated not as a family member, but as a convenience, an unpaid housekeeper, cook, childcare provider, and source of funding. I didn't agree to this arrangement. I was eased into it through a series of small surrenders, each seemingly reasonable at the time. Judge Oakes studied me carefully. Mrs. Wilson, why did you not raise concerns earlier about the financial arrangements? Because I didn't fully understand them, Your Honor. Gregory told me he needed to be on my accounts just in case, and that the house money was being set aside for my future care. I trusted him to honor that. My late husband and I raised him to be honest and responsible. I couldn't imagine he would systematically appropriate my life savings for his own use. I glanced at Gregory, who stared straight ahead, jaw clenched. I also feared exactly what has happened, being labeled as confused or ungrateful for questioning these arrangements. When you're made to feel that your home, your relationship with your grandchildren, your very place in the family depends on your compliance, you learn to stay quiet. Gregory's attorney objected, claiming I was making unsubstantiated accusations, but Judge Oakes waved her down. I'm interested in hearing Mrs. Wilson's perspective. Please continue. I'm not confused, Your Honor. I'm not suffering from dementia. I'm not having a breakdown. I'm simply a woman who finally recognized that her financial and personal autonomy had been systematically stripped away, and who chose to reclaim it. If that makes me difficult or ungrateful in my son's eyes, so be it. I'd rather be difficult than invisible. The hearing continued with financial experts testifying about the pattern of transactions, the questionable conservatorship documentation, and the commingling of assets. Throughout it all, Gregory maintained a facade of concerned confusion, as if he couldn't possibly understand why his generous care was being misconstrued as exploitation. When the judge finally called a recess to consider her decision, Daniel squeezed my shoulder encouragingly. You did well, he murmured as we exited to the hallway. Judge Oakes has a strong record on elder autonomy cases. I'm cautiously optimistic. I nodded, too emotionally drained to respond fully. In the hallway, I caught sight of a familiar figure standing near the water fountain, Martha Jenkins, my friend from nursing school. She approached cautiously, her kind face creased with concern. Ellie, she said softly, I hope you don't mind me being here. Judy told me about the hearing. I'm glad you came, I replied, genuinely touched by her presence. It means a lot to have friendly faces in that room. Martha glanced toward where Gregory stood conferring with his attorney. I always thought he was such a good boy, she said, shaking her head. It just goes to show you never really know what people are capable of. I think that's the hardest part, I admitted. Reconciling the son I raised with the man who could do this. We fell silent as Gregory approached, his attorney at his side. He stopped a few feet away, maintaining the distance required by the protection order. Mom, he said stiffly, could we speak privately for a moment? There's no need to drag this out in court. Daniel stepped forward. Any communication needs to go through counsel, as you well know. The protection order is still in effect. Gregory's face flushed. This is between family. We can resolve this ourselves. Like you resolved my concerns when I was living in your house? I asked quietly. By dismissing them? By telling me I was confused or being difficult? You know that's not fair, Gregory protested, his voice dropping to ensure others couldn't hear. We gave you everything. A home, family, purpose, and this is how you repay us? By making these wild accusations and terrorizing Tyler with police reports? I felt a flash of anger at the mention of my grandson. I filed a factual account of what happened. If Tyler is upset, perhaps he should consider the consequences of his actions, not just his discomfort at being held accountable. Gregory's attorney placed a warning hand on his arm, but he shook it off. This isn't you, Mom. This vindictive person out to punish her family. This isn't the mother I know. You're right, I agreed, meeting his gaze steadily. The mother you knew would have swallowed her hurt, accepted whatever treatment she received, and kept quiet to maintain peace. She would have continued cooking your meals and watching your children while you spent her money. That woman is gone. Gregory, and she's not coming back. Before he could respond, the bailiff announced that court was resuming. We filed back to our respective tables, the brief confrontation hanging in the air between us like a thundercloud. Judge Oakes returned, her expression grave as she took her seat and arranged her notes. After a moment of preparation, she looked up, her gaze moving between Gregory and me. Having reviewed all evidence and testimony in this matter, I find significant cause for concern regarding the establishment and execution of the conservatorship over Eleanor Wilson. She turned her attention fully to Gregory. Mr. Wilson, the documentation establishing your control over your mother's finances shows irregularities that cannot be dismissed. Moreover, the pattern of transactions following the establishment of this conservatorship is troubling, showing systematic redirection of Mrs. Wilson's assets to purposes that primarily benefited your household rather than her. Gregory started to speak, but his attorney silenced him with a touch. Furthermore, Judge Oakes continued, the medical evaluation conducted by Dr. Sanderson conclusively demonstrates that Mrs. Wilson is fully capable of managing her own affairs. The timing of your sudden concern about her cognitive abilities, arising only after she questioned financial arrangements, suggests an attempt to maintain control rather than genuine concern for her welfare. She straightened her papers decisively. I hereby dissolve the conservatorship, effective immediately. Mr. Wilson will have no further legal authority over Mrs. Wilson's finances or personal decisions. I released a breath I hadn't realized. I was holding, feeling lightheaded with relief. Additionally, the judge continued, I am ordering a full forensic accounting of all transactions involving Mrs. Wilson's assets since the conservatorship began, to be completed within 30 days. Based on those findings, this court will determine what restitution may be appropriate. She fixed Gregory with a stern look. Mr. Wilson, this court takes financial exploitation of seniors very seriously. The protection order will remain in effect until the financial matters are resolved. I strongly suggest you cooperate fully with the accounting process and consider making amends voluntarily before this court is forced to impose more serious remedies. With a sharp rap of her gavel, she concluded the hearing. People began shuffling, papers and rising from seats, the tension in the room dissipating into murmurs and movement. Daniel turned to me with a smile. That's the best outcome we could have hoped for at this stage. The conservatorship is dissolved, and the judge clearly sees the financial issues for what they are. I nodded, feeling strangely numb despite the victory. Across the aisle, Gregory stared at me for a long moment, his expression unreadable, before following his attorney from the courtroom without a word. Martha and Judy waited for me in the hallway, both breaking into smiles when Daniel gave them a thumbs up. Martha hugged me tightly while Judy squeezed my hand. "First step done," Judy said encouragingly. "Now you get to decide what comes next." What came next was rebuilding. With the conservatorship dissolved, I gained access to what remained of my accounts, far less than there should have been, but enough to begin establishing independence. The court-ordered accounting would determine how much Gregory might eventually be required to repay, but Daniel cautioned me not to count on substantial restitution. Even with a favorable ruling, collecting can be difficult, he explained gently. And some assets, like the house addition, can't be easily untangled. "I understand," I said, and I did. This fight had never been primarily about the money. It was about autonomy, dignity, and truth. With the judge's ruling, I'd reclaimed the most important part: control over my own life. The weeks following the hearing brought unexpected developments. The first surprise came in the form of a text message from Megan, sent to the new phone number I'd shared with her through Judy. "Grandma, can I visit you? Please?" I hesitated, unsure if this was something Gregory and Pam had put her up to. The protection order technically included the children, though I had never intended to cut off contact with my grandchildren completely. "I'd love to see you," I replied carefully. "But I need to make sure it's okay with the court. There are some complicated rules right now. Let me check and get back to you." Daniel confirmed that supervised visitation with Megan would not violate the order, provided Gregory and Pam were not involved. Judy volunteered to pick her up from her piano lesson the following week. When Megan arrived at the lake cottage, she flew into my arms with a sob that broke my heart. "I missed you so much," she whispered, clinging to me as if afraid I might disappear again. "I've missed you too, sweetheart," I said, stroking her hair. "So very much." We spent the afternoon walking along the lake shore, skipping stones across the water, and talking, really talking, in a way we never had when I lived in their home. Megan was surprisingly perceptive about the family situation. "Dad and Mom fight all the time now," she confided as we sat on the dock, feet dangling above the water. "About money mostly. Dad says we have to tighten our belts until the legal nonsense is over." "I'm sorry to hear that," I said carefully. "That must be hard for you." She shrugged, tracing patterns on the wooden planks with her finger. "Tyler gets away with everything now. He broke his laptop on purpose when Dad wouldn't buy him the new gaming system, and instead of being punished, he got a new laptop the next day." "How do you know he broke it on purpose?" "Because he told me he was going to," she said matter-of-factly. "He said Dad can't say no to him right now because of the grandma situation, whatever that means." I tried to keep my expression neutral, despite the anger flaring inside me. Even in this, Gregory was teaching his children the wrong lessons, that manipulation worked, that accountability could be avoided, that people were tools to be used rather than individuals to be respected. "What about you?" I asked gently. "How are you handling everything?" Megan's face crumpled slightly. "I don't understand why you and Dad can't just talk to each other. He says you're confused and sick, but you don't seem confused to me. You seem like you're more yourself than when you lived with us." The observation, so simple yet profound coming from a 10-year-old, nearly brought me to tears. "That's very insightful, Megan. I do feel more like myself now. Sometimes, Adults have complicated problems that can't be solved just by talking. Your dad and I see things very differently, and right now we need some space from each other. But you still love me, right? Even though you're mad at Dad? Of course I do, I assured her, pulling her close. Nothing could ever change that. You are not responsible for what's happening between the adults in your family. After Megan left, promising to visit again as soon as she could, I sat on the porch with Judy, watching twilight settle over the lake. She's a remarkable child, Judy observed. So emotionally intelligent. She reminds me of how Gregory was at that age, I said, feeling a pang of sadness. Sensitive, perceptive, quick to sense the feelings of others. I don't know what happened to change him so completely. People make choices, Judy said simply. Every day, in small ways, they choose what kind of person they're becoming. Gregory made his choices. You're making different ones now. Fuck him. Financial accounting ordered by the court proceeded slowly, with Gregory's team raising objections and requesting extensions at every opportunity. It was a delaying tactic, designed to wear me down or run out the clock until I might give up or settle for less than I deserved. I refused to be rushed or pressured. The lake cottage had become a sanctuary, a place where I could heal and rediscover aspects of myself long suppressed. Photography filled my mornings, the library my afternoons. I joined a memoir writing group at the community center and began tentatively capturing my experiences on paper. These small acts of self-reclamation strengthened me for the legal battle that continued to unfold. 3 months after the conservatorship hearing, the forensic accountant finally submitted his report to the court. The findings were even worse than I'd anticipated. Over the course of 2 years, Gregory had diverted approximately $387,000 of my assets to his family's use, renovations to their home, private school tuition for the children, luxury vacations, car payments, and credit card debt. The house addition that supposedly justified the sale of my home had cost less than a third of the proceeds, with the remainder absorbed into their general finances. Daniel called an emergency meeting at his office to discuss the findings. This report gives us tremendous leverage, he explained, spreading the documents across his desk. Judge Oakes has already shown she takes this seriously. With these numbers, we can push for full restitution plus penalties. Can they actually pay it back? I asked practically. Megan mentioned they're already having financial difficulties. Daniel's expression turned grim. That's the next complication. Based on what we're seeing, they've been living significantly beyond their means even before adding your resources to the mix. Gregory's income is substantial, but not enough to support their lifestyle. They have multiple mortgages on the house, significant credit card debt, and virtually no savings. So even if the court orders repayment, there may not be funds immediately available, he confirmed. We would likely need to place liens on their property, garnish wages, perhaps force a sale of assets. It would be a long process. I considered this sobering reality. The money that Frank and I had carefully saved over decades, the security we'd planned for my later years, had been squandered in a matter of months on granite countertops, private school tuition, and whatever else Gregory and Pam deemed essential to their lifestyle. What are my options? I asked finally. We proceed with the restitution hearing and seek maximum recovery, Daniel said. Or, and I'm not necessarily recommending this, we could attempt to negotiate a settlement. Gregory might be motivated to avoid the public record of financial exploitation that would come with a formal judgment. I took the financial report home to study more carefully, spread across Judy's kitchen table like a map of betrayal. Each transaction told a story, not just of money diverted, but of the casual entitlement behind those diversions. Gregory hadn't even attempted to disguise many of the expenditures. Why would he? He'd never expected to be held accountable. The next day, I received an unexpected email from Pam. The subject line read simply, "Please read. Important." I almost deleted it unread, assuming it was another attempt at manipulation. but curiosity won out. "Eleanor," it began, uncharacteristically formal. "I'm writing without Gregory's knowledge. The financial report has been shared with us, and I want you to know I had no idea of the extent of what was happening. I believed Gregory when he said you had agreed to help with our expenses. I believed him when he said the house money was being set aside for your future care. I was wrong." I read the message twice, skepticism warring with surprise. Pam continued, "Our marriage is ending. I've moved out with the children. The things that have come to light, not just with your finances but other deceptions, have forced me to recognize who Gregory really is. I can't change what happened to you, and for my part in it, I am truly sorry. What I can do is ensure Megan and Tyler understand the truth, not the version their father has been telling them." The email concluded with a request to meet, with Judy present if that would make me more comfortable, to discuss arranging regular visitation with the children outside of Gregory's presence. I forwarded the message to Daniel, who advised caution. "This could be genuine remorse, or it could be a strategy to gain your sympathy and persuade you to accept a lesser settlement," he warned. "I suggest proceeding carefully." I agreed to meet Pam at a cafe halfway between our locations, with Judy accompanying me as both support and witness. When I arrived, I almost didn't recognize my daughter-in-law. Gone was the perfectly coiffed real estate agent with designer clothes and impeccable makeup. This Pam looked tired, her hair pulled back simply, her face scrubbed clean of artifice. "Thank you for coming," she said, sliding into the booth across from us. "I wasn't sure you would." "I'm not making any promises," I said directly. "I'm here to listen." Pam nodded, her hands wrapped around her coffee mug as if drawing warmth from it. "That's fair. More than fair, considering everything." She took a deep breath. "After you left, things fell apart quickly. Gregory was obsessed with the legal case, with controlling the narrative, with making sure everyone saw him as the victim of his ungrateful, confused mother." She looked up, meeting my eyes directly. "But I saw the financial report, Eleanor. No one confused about money takes such systematic, deliberate steps to redirect funds. No one forgets authorizing hundreds of thousands in expenditures. You benefited from those expenditures," I pointed out, not unkindly but factually. "The kitchen renovation, the vacations, the tuition payments." "Yes," she admitted, cheeks flushing. "I did, and I can't claim I was completely in the dark. I knew we were spending beyond our means. I knew the money had to be coming from somewhere. I just chose not to examine it too closely. It was easier to believe we deserved it somehow." Judy spoke up, her tone measured. "Why are you telling Ellie this now? What do you want from her?" Pam set down her mug carefully. "Two things. First, I want her to know that I've told the children the truth. An age-appropriate version, but the truth nonetheless. That their father took money that belonged to their grandmother without her permission. That what Tyler did with the hot water was wrong, and the way it was handled afterward was even more wrong. How did they take it?" I asked, thinking of Megan's perceptiveness and Tyler's troubling behavior. Megan already suspected something wasn't right. Tyler. She hesitated. "Tyler is struggling. He's angry, defensive. He's been raised to believe he's entitled to whatever he wants, that consequences are for other people. Unlearning that won't be easy or quick." "And the second thing?" Judy prompted. "I want to make this right as much as I can," Pam said firmly. "I've consulted my own attorney. I'm prepared to cooperate fully with the restitution process, to provide any documentation needed about where the money went. When the house sells, and it will have to sell, I want Ellie's claim to be first in line, ahead of the mortgage company, ahead of any other debts." I studied her face, looking for signs of deception or calculation. I saw only exhaustion and what appeared to be genuine remorse. "Why?" I asked simply. "Why now?" Pam was quiet for a moment, staring down at her hands. Because Megan asked me a question I couldn't answer. She said, "Mom, if it was wrong for Tyler to hurt Grandma, why wasn't it wrong for us to take her? Money?" And I had no defense, no justification, just shame. She looked up, eyes bright with unshed tears. "I don't expect forgiveness, Eleanor. I don't even expect you to believe me. But I need my children to see that when adults make terrible mistakes, they try to make amends. Not with excuses or denials, but with actions." I felt something shift inside me. Not forgiveness exactly, not yet, but perhaps the first opening where forgiveness might eventually grow. "What does Gregory say about all this?" "He doesn't know I'm here. He's still insisting he did nothing." "Wrong, that everything was done with your implicit consent, that you've manufactured this crisis for attention." Pam shook her head. "He actually believes it now. He's rewritten history in his mind to make himself the victim." After our meeting, Judy and I drove back to the cottage in thoughtful silence. Finally, as we pulled into the driveway, she asked, "Do you believe her?" I considered the question carefully. I think I do. Not completely, perhaps, but enough to consider what she's offering. Which is? A chance to maintain a relationship with my grandchildren, cooperation in recovering at least some of what was taken, and something I didn't expect, accountability. She's acknowledging what happened rather than denying or justifying it. That night, I sat on the porch watching stars emerge over the lake, thinking about choices and consequences, about damage and repair. I thought about Megan's clear-eyed perception and Tyler's troubling path. I thought about Gregory, rewriting reality rather than facing it, and Pam, finally choosing truth over comfort. Most of all, I thought about myself, the woman I had been, the woman I had allowed myself to become in their home, and the woman I was becoming now. Each version had made choices, some wiser than others. The question was, what choice would I make next? When Daniel called the following morning to discuss strategy for the upcoming restitution hearing, I shared Pam's offer of cooperation. "That could be extremely helpful," he acknowledged. "Especially her testimony about Gregory's knowledge and intent. It would strengthen our case significantly." "I've been thinking," I said slowly, "about what justice really means in this situation." "Go on," Daniel encouraged. "The money matters, of course it does. It represents security and independence for me, opportunities I've been denied, choices I should have been able to make. But it also represents something else, a relationship that can never be the same again." I paused, organizing my thoughts. I want what's rightfully mine returned. But I also want to make sure my grandchildren aren't collateral damage in this process. Especially Megan, who's trying so hard to understand what's happening and make sense of the adult's behavior. "What are you suggesting?" "I'd like to explore a settlement option that prioritizes steady repayment over punitive measures," I said carefully. "One that includes mandatory financial counseling for Gregory, continued access to my grandchildren, and perhaps some form of community service related to elder issues." Daniel was silent for a moment. "That's unusually generous considering the circumstances." "Not generous," I corrected him. "Strategic. I don't expect Gregory to change overnight, or maybe ever. But I want there to be a path forward that isn't just about punishment, for the children's sake, if nothing else." We discussed the practicalities of such an approach, how to structure repayment, what conditions to attach, how to ensure compliance without constant legal battles. By the end of the conversation, a framework had emerged that felt right, firm but not vindictive, clear-eyed but not harsh. "I'll draft the proposal," Daniel said, "but I want to be clear. You're entitled to push for maximum penalties here. No one would fault you for it." "I know," I said. "But this isn't about what others think I should do. It's about what I can live with. what aligns with my values, what serves the future I want to build. As I hung up, I noticed a monarch butterfly resting on the porch railing, vibrant orange wings pulsing slowly in the morning sunlight. I watched it for several minutes, thinking about transformation, about the mysterious process that turns one form of life into something entirely different yet connected to its origins. The butterfly eventually took flight, carried by the lake breeze toward new horizons. I watched until it disappeared from sight, then turned back toward the cottage. With a sense of clarity I hadn't felt in years. The path ahead wasn't perfect or easy, but it was mine to choose. And for now, that was enough. The weekend after my meeting with Pam, Judy drove me to Cedar Grove Community Center for an event I'd been avoiding for months, the retirement celebration for Dr. Sanderson. As a former nurse who had worked alongside him for years, my absence would have been noticed and questioned. With the court proceedings becoming common knowledge throughout our small community, I needed to reclaim my place in public spaces rather than hiding away as if I had something to be ashamed of. "You're sure you're ready for this?" Judy asked, as we pulled into the parking lot. "There will be a lot of familiar faces." I smoothed the collar of my new blue dress, a small splurge I'd allowed myself once I regained control of my finances. "I'm sure. It's time I stopped letting Gregory's narrative define me." The community center hall had been transformed with white tablecloths and flower arrangements. Familiar faces turned as we entered, conversations pausing briefly before resuming. With heightened energy, I felt the weight of curious glances, heard the drop in volume as people noticed my presence. Rather than shrinking from it, I stood straighter, smiling and nodding at acquaintances as we made our way through the crowd. Sandra Murray, who had been the hospital's head administrator during my tenure, approached immediately. "Eleanor, it's wonderful to see you." Her embrace felt genuine, though her eyes held questions she was too polite to ask directly. "Thank you, Sandra. I wouldn't miss celebrating Dr. Sanderson's career." I gestured toward the refreshment table. "Shall we get some punch?" As we moved through the room, I could sense the whispered conversations trailing in our wake. The story of my court case against Gregory had spread through Cedar Grove like wildfire, with versions ranging from fairly accurate to wildly distorted. Some painted me as the victim of heartless exploitation, others as a confused old woman manipulated by greedy lawyers, and still others as an ungrateful mother turning on the son who had generously taken her in. Dr. Sanderson himself broke through, the awkwardness, crossing the room to greet me with a warm handshake that turned into a brief hug. "Eleanor, I'm so glad you could make it. How are you settling into Judy's lake place?" "Quite well," I replied, grateful for his straightforward approach. "It's peaceful there. Good for reflection." He nodded, understanding what I wasn't saying explicitly. "You look well. Better than when I saw you for that evaluation, if I may say so. Freedom agrees with me, I suppose." He smiled, a touch of sadness in his eyes. "I've been practicing medicine for 42 years, and still, family dynamics never cease to surprise me, their power to heal or to harm." He lowered his voice slightly. "For what it's worth, I believe you did the right thing, standing up for yourself. Too many of my older patients don't." Before I could respond, we were interrupted by the arrival of Harold Jenkins, Martha's husband and a longtime friend of Gregory's. His expression tight with barely concealed disapproval, he acknowledged me with a curt nod before turning to Dr. Sanderson. "Richard, congratulations on your retirement. The hospital won't be the same without you." He deliberately angled his body to exclude me from the conversation. Dr. Sanderson, ever the diplomat, shifted to include me in their circle. "Harold, I believe you know Eleanor Wilson. She was one of our finest nurses before her retirement." Harold couldn't avoid acknowledging me directly without appearing blatantly rude. "Eleanor," he said stiffly, "surprised to see you here." I wouldn't miss honoring Dr. Sanderson's service to our community, I replied evenly. We worked together for many years. Yes, well, Harold cleared his throat uncomfortably. I saw Gregory yesterday at the club. He's taking all this unpleasantness rather hard. I met his gaze steadily. I imagine he is. Accountability can be difficult. Harold's face flushed. That's a matter of perspective, isn't it? Some might say pursuing legal action against your own son speaks more to your character than his. Dr. Sanderson placed a gentle hand on my arm, sensing my tension. Harold, perhaps today isn't the time. It's all right, I interrupted softly. Harold is entitled to his opinion, just as I'm entitled to protect myself from financial exploitation, regardless of who was doing the exploiting. Harold's expression darkened. Gregory gave you a home when you had nowhere to go. He included you in his family. And this is how you repay his generosity? By dragging his name through the mud, making wild accusations. They aren't accusations, Harold. They're documented facts. The court has the financial records. Every penny that was taken, every account that was drained, every asset that was misappropriated. It's all there in black and white. My voice remained calm, though my heart raced. I understand loyalty to your friend, but please don't confuse loyalty with enabling behavior that is both morally and legally wrong. A small crowd had gathered around us, drawn by the rising tension. Harold glanced at their attentive faces and seemed to realize he'd miscalculated. His righteous defense of Gregory was playing poorly against the dignified older woman who wasn't behaving at all like someone confused or vindictive. We'll see what the final ruling says, he muttered before excusing himself and retreating to the far side of the room. Martha appeared at my side as her husband stalked away. I apologize for Harold, she said quietly. He and Gregory golf together, and he's only heard one side of this story. It's all right, I assured her, though my hands trembled slightly from the confrontation. I expected something like this. Better to face it directly than hide away and let rumors flourish. The encounter with Harold, while uncomfortable, proved oddly liberating. By appearing in public, by calmly stating my truth without anger or defensiveness, I had begun reclaiming my narrative. The whispers didn't stop completely, but their tone shifted. People who had been avoiding my gaze now approached with hesitant smiles and casual questions about my life at the lake. By the time Judy and I left the celebration 2 hours later, I felt a subtle shift in the community's perception. I was no longer just poor Eleanor or Gregory's difficult mother, but Eleanor Wilson, a person in my own right, with dignity and agency, handling a painful situation with grace. You did well in there, Judy commented as we drove home. Especially with Harold. That couldn't have been easy. Actually, it was easier than I expected, I admitted. For months I've been dreading what people might say or think, but facing it head-on took away its power somehow. That's because you're standing in your truth, Judy said simply. It has a strength that lies don't, no matter how elaborate or well-defended those lies might be. The following week brought another milestone, my first scheduled visitation with Tyler since leaving Gregory's home. Unlike Megan, who had eagerly embraced the opportunity to maintain our relationship, Tyler had remained distant and defensive. According to Pam, he had initially refused to visit me at all, still insisting that the hot water incident had been an accident for which I had overreacted. It had taken several sessions with a family therapist to convince him to agree to even one supervised meeting. The court had approved the arrangement, with the stipulation that Pam remain present throughout, and that the visit take place at a neutral location rather than at Judy's cottage. We arranged to meet at Traverse City Public Library in a small study room reserved for the occasion. I arrived early, my stomach knotted with anxiety. How would I react to seeing Tyler again? The last time I'd been in his presence, he had deliberately injured me, then lied about it without hesitation or remorse. Yet he was still my grandson, Still the little boy who had once fallen asleep in my lap during thunderstorms, whose small hand had once trustingly held mine. I was arranging a few books and games on the table, hopeful diversions if conversation faltered, when Pam arrived with Tyler trailing reluctantly behind her. At 14, he seemed to have grown even taller in the months since I'd last seen him, his frame lanky and awkward. His face, once open and expressive, had hardened into teenage inscrutability, his eyes carefully avoiding mine as he slouched into a chair. "Hello, Tyler," I said gently. "Thank you for coming today." He shrugged, studying the tabletop with intense concentration. Didn't have much choice. Pam shot him a warning look. "Tyler, we discussed this. You agreed to approach this meeting with respect. Whatever." He slumped further in his seat, radiating reluctance with every fiber of his being. An uncomfortable silence descended. I had prepared for this possibility, knowing that reconnection couldn't be forced or rushed. "I brought some of those mint cookies you used to like," I offered, sliding a small container across the table. "And I thought maybe we could play chess. You were getting quite good at it before." Before I left, before everything changed, the unspoken words hung in the air between us. Tyler's eyes flicked briefly to the chess set, then back to the table. "I don't play anymore." Another silence. Pam looked increasingly uncomfortable, caught between her son's hostility and her awareness of the harm he had caused. "Tyler, perhaps you could tell your grandmother about your science project? The one that won honorable mention?" Tyler shot her a resentful look, but muttered, "It was just a solar oven thing. No big deal." "That sounds interesting," I said, genuinely curious, despite the tension. "How does it work?" For a moment I thought he wouldn't answer. Then, almost against his will, his interest in the subject overcame his determination to remain aloof. "It uses reflective panels to concentrate sunlight onto a cooking chamber. I got it hot enough to bake cookies." "That's impressive," I said, noting how his posture had straightened slightly as he described his project. "You always did have a good mind for how things work." He shrugged again, but this time the gesture seemed less dismissive, more uncertain. "It's just physics." We continued this way for nearly 30 minutes, halting conversation, long silences, brief moments of almost normal interaction followed by renewed withdrawal. It was painfully clear that Tyler was struggling with complicated emotions, anger, guilt, confusion, and beneath it all, an adolescent's fear of vulnerability. Finally, as our allotted time neared its end, I decided to address the elephant in the room. "Tyler, I know this is difficult. What happened between us, the hot water, everything that followed, it changed our relationship in ways that aren't easy to fix." He stiffened, eyes darting toward his mother as if seeking guidance or protection. "I'm not bringing it up to make you uncomfortable," I continued carefully. "But I think pretending it didn't happen won't help either of us move forward." Tyler's face flushed, a mix of anger and shame crossing his features. "Dad says you're just trying to get attention, that you made it into a bigger deal than it was." The words stung, but I kept my expression neutral. "What do you think? Not what your father thinks, but you." He looked startled by the question, as if no one had bothered to ask for his honest perspective before. After a long pause, he admitted reluctantly, "I didn't mean for the water to get on you, but—" He stopped, struggling. "But you were angry," I finished quietly. "And in that moment, you wanted to hurt me." His eyes met mine for the first time, wary but also somehow relieved at the direct acknowledgement. "Yeah." The single syllable seemed to cost him considerable effort. I nodded, appreciating his honesty, however belated. "Thank you for admitting that. It helps me understand." "Are you still mad?" he asked, suddenly sounding younger than his 14 years. I considered the Question carefully. I was hurt, physically and emotionally. And I was disappointed that you lied about what happened afterward. But no, I'm not mad anymore. I'm sad about everything that's happened, and I hope that someday we can rebuild trust between us. He absorbed this, fidgeting with the edge of the table. Mom says what Dad did with your money was wrong, that he took advantage of you. Yes, I said simply. He did. But he's still my dad, Tyler said, a note of defensiveness returning to his voice. Of course he is. And nothing changes the fact that I'm still your grandmother, and I still care about you, even when things are difficult between us. As we prepared to leave, Tyler hesitated, then reached for one of the mint cookies I'd brought. These are still pretty good, he conceded, the closest thing to warmth he'd shown during our meeting. I'll bring more next time, I said. If you want there to be a next time. He didn't say yes, but he didn't say no either. In the context of our strained relationship, this felt like a small victory. Not reconciliation, but perhaps the first tentative step toward it. Pam lingered after Tyler stepped into the hallway, her expression both apologetic and hopeful. He insisted for weeks that he wouldn't come at all. The fact that he actually talked to you, even a little, is significant. Progress. I know, I assured her. I wasn't expecting miracles today. The therapist says it may take months before he's ready to truly acknowledge and process what happened. He's carrying a lot of confusion right now. Messages from his father that contradict what he knows deep down is true. I nodded, understanding all too well the psychological tangle the boy was navigating. Just keep the door open for communication. That's all we can do for now. As Pam turned to follow Tyler, she paused. Eleanor. Thank you. For not giving up on him. Not many people would show that kind of grace after what he did. Her words stayed with me during the drive back to Judy's cottage, prompting reflection on the nature of forgiveness and its complex relationship with accountability. Tyler needed to be held responsible for his actions, yes, but he also needed the opportunity to make amends, to grow beyond the worst thing he had done. Wasn't that what we all needed, ultimately? The settlement negotiations with Gregory proceeded with excruciating slowness, each step forward followed by new objections or delays. His initial response to our proposal had been predictably dismissive, insisting that any agreement acknowledge the funds as gifts freely given rather than misappropriated assets. He's still trying to control the narrative, Daniel explained during our weekly phone update. For Gregory, this isn't just about the money anymore. It's about saving face, avoiding the public admission that what he did was wrong. That's not something I'm willing to concede, I said firmly. The financial arrangements I can be somewhat flexible on, but not the fundamental truth of what happened. I've made that clear to his attorney. Interestingly, they've stopped challenging the core financial findings. The focus now is on terms of repayment and conditions. This shift in strategy suggested Gregory was finally accepting that complete denial was no longer viable. The forensic accounting had created an irrefutable paper trail that even the most sympathetic judge would recognize as exploitation. His energy was now directed toward damage control, minimizing penalties, stretching repayment over the longest possible period, and preventing the case from establishing legal precedent that might influence similar situations. Meanwhile, my life at the lake cottage had developed a comfortable rhythm. Mornings were for photography, capturing the ever-changing moods of the water and sky. Afternoons often found me at the library, where I'd begun helping with a program, teaching digital literacy to seniors. Evenings were for quiet conversation with Judy or peaceful solitude, rediscovering the joy of unstructured time that belonged entirely to me. I'd made new friends too, members of the photography group, fellow volunteers at the library, participants in the memoir writing workshop. People who knew me as Eleanor first, not as Gregory's mother or Megan and Tyler's grandmother. This Fresh beginning allowed me to rediscover aspects of myself that had been submerged during the years of gradual erosion in Gregory's home. 6 months after leaving Lakeshore Estates, I received an unexpected call from Howard Peterson, Pam's father. We had never been close. Howard had always focused his attention on Gregory, the successful son-in-law, rarely engaging directly with me beyond polite holiday greetings. "Eleanor," he said, his tone oddly hesitant when I answered. "I hope I'm not disturbing you. I wondered if we might meet for coffee sometime this week." Surprised by the request, I agreed cautiously, suggesting a cafe in Traverse City that offered sufficient privacy for conversation while remaining in a public space. We arranged to meet the following afternoon, leaving me curious and slightly apprehensive about his motives. Howard arrived punctually, looking older and more subdued than I remembered. The confident, sometimes pompous businessman who had dominated family gatherings with tales of his corporate triumphs seemed diminished somehow. His shoulders slightly stooped beneath his expensive sport coat. After brief pleasantries and ordering coffee, he came directly to the point. "Eleanor, I owe you an apology, a significant one." This was the last thing I had expected. "An apology? For what specifically, Howard?" He sighed, staring into his coffee cup as if it contained answers to difficult questions. "For my role in enabling Gregory's behavior. For dismissing your concerns when you tried to raise them. For treating you as peripheral to the family rather than an integral part of it." I studied him, trying to discern his sincerity. "What's prompted this sudden insight?" "Nothing sudden about it, unfortunately. It's been a slow, uncomfortable awakening." He met my gaze directly. "Nancy and I have been dealing with Pam's revelations about the financial situation. Things we didn't know or perhaps chose not to see, and it's forced us to re-examine our own attitudes and assumptions." "Such as?" "Such as the way we tacitly supported Gregory's narrative about you. The comments we let pass unchallenged. The way we accepted his management of your finances without question, even as we observed your increasing isolation." He shook his head. "We should have asked questions. We should have seen the signs." I took a sip of my tea, giving myself time to process his words. "You believed what you wanted to believe, Howard. That Gregory was the successful provider, the generous son taking care of his aging mother. It was a convenient story." "Yes," he admitted, flinching slightly at my directness. "Convenient and comforting. Much easier than considering alternatives that might require intervention or uncomfortable conversations." "Why tell me this now?" Howard straightened, some of his customary dignity reasserting itself. "Because Pam has shown remarkable courage in facing her part in what happened to you. Because our grandchildren are watching how the adults in their lives respond to wrongdoing. And because at my age, I've begun to think more about the legacy I'm leaving behind, not just financially, but morally." The sincerity in his voice was unmistakable, catching me off guard. I had expected many reactions from Gregory's allies: denial, minimization, even hostility. But not this humble acknowledgement of complicity. "I appreciate that, Howard. Truly." I paused, considering. "Have you expressed these thoughts to Gregory as well?" His expression clouded. "I've tried. He's not receptive. He sees Pam's cooperation with your legal team as the ultimate betrayal. He sees my attempts to discuss the situation as choosing sides against him." "And have you chosen sides?" "I've chosen truth," Howard said simply. "However uncomfortable or inconvenient it might be. Nancy and I are helping Pam get established in a new place with the children. We're encouraging her to cooperate fully with the restitution process. And we're making it clear to Gregory that our support, emotional and financial, is contingent on his taking responsibility for his actions." I nodded slowly, recognizing the courage this position required. Howard had always prized family loyalty above most other values. Standing against Gregory, even in this measured way, represented a significant shift in his worldview. That's a difficult stance to take with someone you've supported for so long, I acknowledged. Less difficult than continuing to enable behavior. That's harming everyone involved, including, ultimately, Gregory himself. Howard leaned forward slightly. I don't know if he'll ever admit what he's done or make genuine amends, but I do know that without accountability, there's no possibility of real change or healing. As our conversation concluded, Howard handed me a business card with a handwritten number on the back. My private line, he explained. If you need anything at all, please call. No intermediaries, no filters. I accepted the card, touched by the gesture. Thank you, Howard. This conversation, it means more than you might realize. He nodded, the ghost of a smile crossing his face. Pamela said something similar when we first spoke openly about all this. She said, truth is the first step toward healing. I think she's right. After Howard left, I remained at the cafe, watching afternoon sunlight slant through the windows as I processed our unexpected conversation. There was something profoundly moving about witnessing someone, especially someone who had been aligned against me, choose integrity over comfort, accountability over denial. It reminded me that the ripple effects of standing up for oneself extend far beyond personal vindication. By refusing to accept exploitation and disrespect, I had inadvertently created space for others to examine their own roles in what had happened. For Pam, this meant reconsidering her marriage and her values. For Howard and Nancy, it meant questioning long-held assumptions about family dynamics and responsibilities. Even for Tyler, uncomfortable as it was, my stand had created an opportunity to confront the consequences of his actions and begin the difficult work of making amends. That evening, I shared the details of Howard's visit with Judy as we prepared dinner together in her small kitchen. Well, that's unexpected, she commented, chopping vegetables with efficient precision. Howard Peterson admitting he was wrong about anything, let alone apologizing for it. Wonders never cease. People can surprise you, I said, thinking of the vulnerability I'd glimpsed beneath Howard's usually polished exterior. Sometimes it just takes the right catalyst. And you were that catalyst, Judy observed. By refusing to be silenced, or bought off or dismissed as confused, you forced everyone to confront reality rather than the comfortable fiction they'd created. I hadn't thought of it quite that way before, but she was right. My stand had been personal, a necessary act of self-preservation and dignity. But its effects were rippling outward in ways I couldn't have anticipated, challenging long-established patterns and assumptions within the extended family system. Later that night, I sat on the porch with my journal, recording the day's events and my reflections on them. The evening was cool, but not cold, the lake a silver expanse stretching toward the darkening horizon. As I wrote, I realized I was approaching a crossroads in my journey, a point where I needed to decide what justice truly meant to me in this situation. Was it about recovering every dollar that had been taken? About seeing Gregory face maximum consequences for his actions? About public vindication of my version of events? Or was it about something more fundamental, reclaiming my power, my voice, my ability to shape my own life moving forward? The answer, I was beginning to understand, wasn't about choosing one path over another. It was about integrating all these aspects into a resolution that honored both justice and mercy, accountability and possibility, righteous anger and compassionate wisdom. The settlement conference was scheduled for the following week, a final opportunity to reach agreement before proceeding to a formal hearing. Gregory would be there with his attorney. Pam would attend separately with her legal representation. The court had appointed a mediator to facilitate the negotiation process. As I prepared for this crucial meeting, I found myself thinking often of Frank, what he would advise, how he would balance the competing concerns of financial security and family relationships. Frank had never been vindictive, but neither had he tolerated dishonesty or exploitation. He'd had a gift for finding the path that upheld principles without destroying possibilities for reconciliation. The night before the conference, I dreamed of him for the first time in months. We were sitting on our old front porch, the house we'd shared for decades before his death. In the dream, he didn't speak, just held my hand as we watched the neighborhood, children playing across the street. I woke with tears on my cheeks, but a sense of calm certainty in my heart. The conference room at the courthouse was impersonal and austere. Beige walls, a long table surrounded by uncomfortable chairs, fluorescent, lighting that cast everyone in an unflattering pallor. I arrived early with Daniel, reviewing our strategy one final time before the others appeared. Pam entered next, accompanied by her attorney, a youngish woman with a no-nonsense demeanor. They nodded politely in our direction, taking seats midway, down the table. The mediator, Judge Harriet Klein, retired, arranged her materials at the head of the table, her experienced eyes taking in the room's dynamics with professional interest. Gregory was the last to arrive, striding in with Vanessa Hewitt at his side. He had lost weight, I noticed immediately, his face gaunt beneath a new beard. His eyes flickered briefly in my direction before focusing intently on the mediator. His jaw set in a hard line that spoke volumes about his emotional state. Judge Klein opened the proceedings with a clear overview of the process and goals. We're here to determine if an acceptable settlement can be reached regarding the financial matters between Eleanor Wilson and Gregory Wilson. The court strongly encourages resolution through negotiation rather than formal judgment whenever possible, but any agreement must reflect fair compensation for documented losses and include safeguards against future exploitation. For the next 3 hours, we engaged in the complex dance of negotiation, proposals and counterproposals, caucus sessions where each party conferred privately with the mediator, careful drafting and redrafting of potential agreement language. Throughout the process, Gregory avoided direct interaction with me, speaking only to his attorney or the mediator, his responses clipped and tense. The core issues remained consistent. How much would be repaid and over what time frame? What penalties or interest would apply? What conditions would accompany the settlement regarding future contact, particularly with the grandchildren? And perhaps most contentiously, how would the settlement characterize the financial transactions that had prompted the legal action? By mid-afternoon, we had reached tentative agreement on most practical matters. Gregory would repay $325,000 over 7 years, less than the full amount taken, but a substantial sum that acknowledged the seriousness of the exploitation. The payment schedule included specific benchmarks and consequences for non-compliance. My right to maintain relationship with Megan and Tyler was explicitly protected, with structured visitation separate from any contact with Gregory. The final sticking point was language. Specifically, Gregory's continued insistence that the agreement characterize the funds as disputed family financial arrangements, rather than acknowledging wrongdoing or exploitation. In a private conversation with Judge Klein, I expressed my frustration with this semantic evasion. After everything that's happened, he still can't admit what he did, not even on paper. The judge regarded me thoughtfully. Mrs. Wilson, in my 30 years on the bench, I found that true accountability rarely comes through forced confession. People admit wrongdoing when they're ready to face themselves honestly, not when legal documents require it. So you're suggesting I concede on this point? I asked, surprised. I'm suggesting you consider what matters most in the long term. Will Gregory's internal narrative about these events change because of wording in a settlement? Probably not. But insisting on language he cannot accept might derail practical remedies that would actually improve your situation. I thought about this perspective, weighing principles against pragmatism. The truth matters, I said finally. Not just for me, but for my grandchildren. For the record. Judge Klein nodded. Then perhaps there's a middle path. What if the agreement simply states the objective facts, the amounts transferred, the timing, the absence of documented consent, without requiring either party to characterize those facts in a particular way? This suggestion resonated with me. The facts would speak for themselves without forcing Gregory to mouth words he didn't believe. Anyone reading the settlement would draw their own conclusions about what had occurred. When we reconvened, Daniel presented this compromise approach. Vanessa Hewitt consulted quietly with Gregory, whose expression remained stony, but who eventually gave a curt nod of acceptance. The mediator directed the attorneys to draft appropriate language capturing this approach. As the final documents were being prepared, I found myself seated alone in a small waiting area, processing the day's events. To my surprise, Gregory appeared in the doorway, hovering uncertainly before entering. It was the first time we'd been alone together since I'd walked out of his house 6 months earlier. "They're still working on the paperwork," he said unnecessarily, remaining standing even though there were several empty chairs. I nodded, studying him. Up close, the changes were more apparent. The weight loss, yes, but also a certain diminishment in his bearing. The confident, controlling son who had managed every aspect of my life had been replaced by someone more tentative, perhaps even broken in some fundamental way. "Why did you do it?" I asked quietly. The question I'd carried for months finally, finding voice. Was it just about the money, or was there something else? Gregory stiffened, defensive walls visibly rising. Then, unexpectedly, his shoulders slumped. "I don't know," he admitted, the words seeming to surprise him as much as me. "It started small, using your accounts for household expenses that benefited you too. Then it became easier. Each time, it seemed justifiable somehow. You were living with us. We were taking care of you." The lines blurred. "Did you ever intend to pay it back?" I asked, genuinely curious rather than accusatory. He hesitated, then shook his head slightly. "No." I told myself it was compensation for the disruption to our lives, for taking you in, for everything we were doing for you. A flicker of the old defensiveness returned. "You have no idea how much pressure I was under. The mortgage, the kids' tuition, Pam's expectations. Your money solved problems I couldn't fix on my own." I absorbed this partial confession, recognizing it for what it was. Not a full acceptance of responsibility, but at least an acknowledgement of deliberate choice rather than misunderstanding. "I'm sorry about your marriage," I said, meaning it. Despite everything. "Pam mentioned you're selling the house." A flash of anger crossed his face. Pam chose her side. So did her parents. So did everyone, apparently. The bitterness in his voice was palpable. "You turned my whole life upside down, you know. Was it worth it? Getting your revenge?" The question revealed how fundamentally he still misunderstood my actions. This was never about revenge, Gregory. It was about survival, about dignity, about not allowing myself to be used and discarded. If you see that as revenge, you're missing the point entirely. Before he could respond, Daniel appeared in the doorway, documents in hand. "Everything's ready," he announced, glancing between us with barely concealed curiosity about our private conversation. Gregory nodded stiffly and left without another word. The brief moment of almost vulnerability replaced by his more familiar, defensive shell. I watched him go, feeling a complicated mixture of sadness, disappointment, and something like pity. For all his material success, my son had constructed a life built on appearance rather than substance, control rather than connection. Now, as those foundations crumbled, he was left with little to sustain him beyond blame and resentment. The signing ceremony was brief and subdued. Each party reviewed the final agreement, applied signatures to multiple copies, received appropriate documentation, No handshakes were exchanged, no acknowledgments beyond the bare minimum required by protocol. When it was complete, Gregory departed immediately, while Pam lingered briefly to confirm our next scheduled visit with the children. Outside the courthouse, standing in the crisp autumn air, I felt a curious lightness despite the emotional intensity of the day. The settlement wasn't perfect. No negotiated compromise ever is. But it represented something profound. The formal recognition of my right to autonomy, to respect, to redress when those rights were violated. "How are you feeling?" Daniel asked as we walked toward the parking lot. I considered the question carefully. Relieved, vindicated, a little sad, mostly free. He nodded, understanding. These cases are never simple victories. There's always loss woven into the resolution. Yes, I agreed, but there's something else too, something beyond the legal outcome. What's that? I thought about Howard's apology, Pam's courageous choices, Tyler's halting steps toward accountability, Megan's clear-eyed perception. I thought about my new friends at the lake, my renewed passion for photography, my volunteer work at the library. I thought about the woman I had become through this process, stronger, clearer, more authentically myself than I had been in years. Growth, I said finally. For me, certainly. But also, in unexpected ways, for others. Sometimes standing up creates space for everyone to rise. Daniel smiled, his professional reserve softening momentarily. You know, Mrs. Wilson, in my 20 years of elder law practice, I've worked with hundreds of clients in situations similar to yours. Many get favorable legal outcomes. Few emerge with the kind of personal transformation I've witnessed in you. His words stayed with me during the drive back to Judy's cottage, prompting reflection on the journey that had begun with a painful burn and led to profound healing of a different kind. The settlement marked an important milestone, but it wasn't the end of the story. My story. It was simply the closing of one chapter and the opening of another. One I would write on my own terms, with my own hand. As we turned onto the gravel, road leading to the lake, golden afternoon light filtered through autumn-tinged trees, casting dappled shadows across the windshield. Ahead, the water gleamed like a promise, of peace, of possibility, of years yet to be lived with purpose and presence. I thought about the question Gregory had asked. Was it worth it? The answer seemed so obvious now, so clear that it hardly needed articulation. Yes. 1,000 times, yes. Not because justice had been served, though that mattered. Not because assets had been recovered, though that secured my future. But because in standing up, in saying no more, in refusing to accept less than I deserved, I had reclaimed something far more precious than money or property or even family harmony. I had reclaimed myself. 1 year after the settlement, I stood on the porch of my new cottage, watching the sun rise over Lake Michigan. Unlike Judy's place, which had sheltered me during the storm, this modest home on the eastern shore belonged to me. Purchased with the first substantial payment from Gregory and carefully selected for its peaceful location and manageable size. The morning air carried the scent of pine and fresh water, a gentle reminder of nature's constancy amid life's upheavals. I had moved in just 3 weeks earlier, after months of searching for the right place. Not too isolated, not too close to town, not too large to maintain, not too small for occasional visitors. Most importantly, it was mine, a sanctuary wholly under my control, reflecting my taste and needs rather than someone else's expectations. Inside, my coffee waited on the small dining table, next to a calendar marked with appointments and social engagements, photography club meetings, library volunteer shifts, lunch dates with new friends, and visits with Megan and Tyler. The life I had rebuilt piece by piece, day by day. The relationship with my grandchildren continued to evolve in unexpected ways. Megan, now 11, visited regularly, our bond strengthening through honest conversations and shared activities. She had developed an interest in photography, delighting in joining me for expeditions along the shoreline or into the nearby woods, her perspective offering fresh insights through my old Nikon. Tyler remained more complicated. Our interactions had gradually shifted from tense obligation to cautious connection, with occasional glimpses of the warm relationship we'd once shared. The therapist had been right. Rebuilding trust after such a profound breach required time and patience. But there had been breakthroughs, a genuine laugh during a board game, a spontaneous question about my nursing career, a hesitant apology that seemed to come from his heart rather than external pressure. Gregory maintained his distance, communicating only through his attorney regarding settlement payments. These arrived punctually, perhaps his sole acknowledgement of responsibility. Pam had settled into a teaching position at Traverse City's elementary school, finding unexpected fulfillment in work that allowed her to use her organizational skills more meaningfully than coordinating household renovations or social appearances. Howard and Nancy Peterson had become unexpected allies, occasionally joining me for dinner or cultural events in town. The awkwardness of our revised relationship had gradually given way to a genuine respect that surprised us all. "Life's too short for grudges," Howard had commented during their most recent visit, his gaze drifting toward the lake as if contemplating his own mortality. "And too precious for pretense." Martha remained a steadfast friend, while Judy visited frequently, though she had returned to her own home in Grand Rapids. The circle of connections I had formed in this new chapter of life lacked the intensity of family ties, but offered something equally valuable. Relationships based on choice rather than obligation, on seeing me clearly rather than through the distorting lens of familial roles. On this particular morning, I was preparing for a special visit. Megan's school project on life wisdom required interviewing an older family member about their most important life lessons. She had chosen me without hesitation, according to Pam, and would arrive after lunch with her notebook and carefully prepared questions. As I waited for her, I sorted through recent photographs in my small home office, selecting a few for the upcoming exhibition at Traverse City's Community Gallery. My work had improved significantly over the past year, gaining depth and confidence, along with technical skill. The exhibition director had been particularly drawn to my series on metamorphosis, images capturing transformation in nature as metaphor for human resilience and change. The doorbell chimed promptly at 1 o'clock. Megan stood on the porch, notebook clutched to her chest, her expression a mixture of excitement and nervousness about her first official interview. "Grandma, I have all my questions ready," she announced, dropping her backpack by the door, and following me to the sun porch where I'd arranged comfortable chairs and refreshments. "Mrs. Rodriguez says I need to record your answers exactly, not just what I think you meant." "That sounds very professional," I smiled, pouring lemonade into colorful glasses. "I'll do my best to give thoughtful answers." Megan arranged her materials with endearing seriousness, testing her pencil on the notebook margin before looking up with sudden uncertainty. "Some of the questions might be hard. About, everything that happened with Dad. Is that okay?" I reached across to squeeze her hand gently. "It's okay. Honest questions deserve honest answers." She nodded, relieved, and began with her prepared questions about childhood memories and career choices before working up to the more difficult territory. "What's the hardest thing you ever had to do?" she read from her list, watching me carefully. I considered this, wanting to honor her question without burdening her with details inappropriate for her age. Standing up for myself when it would have been easier to stay quiet. Recognizing that sometimes the most loving thing you can do, for yourself and others, is to establish boundaries about how you'll allow yourself to be treated. She wrote diligently, then looked up. "Is that what happened with Dad? You set boundaries?" "Yes," I answered simply. "Everyone deserves dignity and respect, Megan. Even perhaps especially as we grow older. When those things are missing, something important breaks in our relationships. Dad says you abandoned the family, she said quietly, not writing now. But Mom says you saved yourself. They're both describing the same event from different perspectives, I explained carefully. Sometimes when people feel hurt or ashamed, they create stories that make their pain easier to bear. Your father's story focuses on what he lost. My story, and perhaps your mother's, focuses on what was necessary for healing to begin. Megan considered this thoughtfully. Like when Tyler hurt you. He told himself a story that made it seem like your fault instead of his. Exactly like that, I agreed, impressed by her insight. We all do this sometimes. The challenge is recognizing when we're creating stories that protect us from uncomfortable truths. She returned to her list of questions, but I could see her, mind working through these concepts, applying them to her own observations and experiences. What's the most important thing you've learned in your whole life? She read finally, her pencil poised for my response. I gazed out at the lake, its surface rippled by afternoon breeze, constantly changing yet fundamentally unchanged. How to distill decades of experience, including this recent painful chapter, into wisdom a child could understand and carry forward. That we always have choices, I said finally. Not about what happens to us, much of that is beyond our control, but about how we respond, how we interpret events, what meaning we create from our experiences. Even in the most difficult circumstances, we can choose dignity over degradation, truth over comfort, growth over stagnation. Megan wrote this down carefully, her small face serious with concentration. When she finished, she closed her notebook and looked up at me with eyes that seemed older than her years. I'm glad you chose dignity, Grandma, she said simply. And I'm glad you're teaching me to choose it too. In that moment, looking at my granddaughter's earnest face, I understood something profound about legacy. That it consists not primarily of money or property or even family harmony, but of the values we demonstrate through our choices, especially when those choices are difficult. Whatever financial settlement the courts had ordered, this was the true restitution, the opportunity to show the next generation a different path, a better way of being in relationship with themselves and others. Later, after Megan had left with her completed interview and a container of cookies for the journey home, I returned to the porch with my camera. The late afternoon light cast long shadows across the water, creating the interplay of darkness and illumination that made for compelling images. I adjusted the settings, framed the shot, and pressed the shutter, capturing a moment of perfect balance, water and sky, shadow and light, ending and beginning. The camera felt solid in my hands, an extension of my vision and intention. Like the life I had reclaimed and rebuilt, it required both technical skill and creative spirit, both structure and freedom. I took several more photographs as the sun began its descent, each frame a testament to the beauty that emerges when we choose to truly see what lies before us, when we refuse to look away from either darkness or light. As twilight softened the landscape, I gathered my equipment and returned inside, moving through rooms that reflected my preferences, my history, my emerging future. The scar on my arm had faded to a pale reminder, visible but no longer angry or painful. Like so many wounds, physical and emotional, it had become part of my story rather than defining it. Evidence of harm experienced and healing embraced. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges and opportunities. A morning meeting with the exhibition committee, afternoon calls with Daniel about the next settlement payment, evening work on the memoir I had tentatively begun. Small steps in a continuing journey of reclamation and discovery. Not the life I had planned or expected, but one rich with authentic connection, meaningful purpose, and hard-won wisdom. As darkness fell, I stood at the window watching lights appear along the distant shore, each one representing lives being lived, stories unfolding, choices being made. Somewhere among them, Gregory continued his journey, facing consequences that might eventually lead to transformation or might simply embitter him further. That outcome was beyond my control or responsibility. My task was to remain faithful to my own path, to honor the truth that had set me free, to leave the door open to genuine reconciliation without sacrificing the boundaries that protected my well-being. I touched the window glass lightly, a silent acknowledgement of all that had been lost and all that had been gained. Then I turned away, moving with quiet certainty through the home that was truly mine, into a future I had chosen for myself. Up. Next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.